must have a central role. But, as many family members of the hostages have warned, this decision by the Israeli government will do nothing to secure the return of the hostages. Instead, it risks further endangering their lives. This escalation will only exacerbate an already catastrophic humanitarian crisis, uprooting 1 million more people and forcing them into dangerously overcrowded, unsanitary, and undersupplied areas. In Gaza, children and babies are suffering from starvation. Hundreds of civilians have been killed trying to access basic food supplies. This inhumanity cannot be justified. The partial aid access Israel granted in late July has proven woefully inadequate. We have a clear message for Israel. Urgently and permanently lift all restrictions on aid delivery. Yesterday, the UK announced a further $11.4 million for OCHA's Occupied Palestinian Territories Humanitarian Fund. It is vital that the UN and established humanitarian partners can operate safely and at scale, in line with the principles of humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence. And Israel must not bar humanitarian NGOs from their essential work through unreasonable and arbitrary registration requirements. All land routes must be opened for essential supplies, including food, baby formula, medicine, shelter, fuel, and clean water. President, a diplomatic solution is possible, but both parties must step away from the path of destruction. We urge the parties to engage in good faith negotiations and to show political will to secure a ceasefire deal and commit to a path to peace. The recent conference on the two-state solution was a powerful demonstration of the international resolve to achieve a brighter future for the region. The UK will continue working with our partners on a long-term plan to secure peace in the region as part of a two-state solution. This is the only way to guarantee Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in peace, security, and dignity. I thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación del Reino Unido su declaración. Doy ahora la palabra a la delegación de Dinamarca.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to thank ASG and Director Roger Singham for their briefings. Denmark joined France, Greece, Slovenia, and the UK in calling for this urgent meeting. For months, the world has watched in despair as conditions in Gaza have grown more catastrophic by the day. Heartbreaking images and videos of suffering, destruction, and death live-streamed on a daily basis. Instead of heeding our call to immediately end the war in Gaza, Israel has chosen to further escalate its offensive. We condemn the Israeli government's decision to expand the military operation in Gaza. We urge Israel to reverse its decision, which will not secure the release of the hostages nor help end the conflict. It will only cause further bloodshed and deepen the suffering of civilians. We categorically reject any forced displacement. The ICJ's advisory opinion on this matter must be fully respected. Any unilateral attempts to alter the demography or status of the Gaza Strip are unacceptable and constitute a clear violation of international law. Mr. President, civilians in Gaza are starving and face severe limitation in accessing humanitarian aid which Israel is obligated to ensure the population receives. According to OCHA, 1 in 3 people in Gaza has not eaten for days, and over 1,300 of them have been killed while seeking food, most of them young men and boys desperately seeking to feed their families. Today, the entire Strip faces famine-like conditions. This is unconscionable. We deplore the killings of starving civilians trying to get food. The alarming frequency and scale of these incidents are simply unacceptable. We reiterate our call for transparent investigations into these incidents. As we have said many times before, Israel must immediately change course. All restrictions on the delivery of humanitarian aid must be lifted. Civilians, including humanitarian and UN personnel, as well as civilian infrastructure, must be protected in accordance with international law. We must return to the UN-led humanitarian aid system at once. Humanitarian aid must cease to be politicized and used as a political bargaining chip in Gaza. Denmark firmly condemns the heinous terrorist attacks on 7 October 2023 perpetrated by Hamas. There can be no justification for this attack, nor for the continued maltreatment of the remaining hostages. However, Israel's response must be exercised in compliance with international law and with full respect for international humanitarian law. The fight against terrorism cannot come at the expense of the rules that safeguard humanity. To conclude, Mr. President, the violence in Gaza must end. To the parties, we demand a return to a ceasefire, the delivery of humanitarian aid with no restrictions, and the immediate and unconditional release of all the remaining hostages. Denmark will never go back on those principles and will continue to reiterate these demands. We will not tire in our support to the two-state solution, and we will not tire in our commitment to peace in the Middle East. We urge the warring parties to stop burying peace in the rubbles. Thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación de Dinamarca su declaración. Doy ahora la palabra a la delegación de Francia.
Monsieur le Président, je voudrais vous remercier d'avoir convoqué cette réunion d'urgence que nous avons demandée avec nos partenaires européens du Conseil de sécurité. Je remercie également le sous-secrétaire général, M. Miroslav Jenča, ainsi que M. Ramesh Rajasingham du BCAH pour leurs interventions aujourd'hui. Face à la gravité des dernières annonces faites par Israël, il nous fallait tirer la sonnette d'alarme. Comme nous l'avons indiqué le 8 août dernier, la France condamne, dans les termes les plus forts, le plan du gouvernement israélien d'étendre ses opérations militaires pour prendre le contrôle de la ville de Gaza en vue de contrôler militairement l'ensemble de la bande de Gaza. La France appelle le gouvernement israélien à revenir sur cette décision. Elle rappelle sa ferme opposition à tout projet d'occupation, d'annexion et de colonisation de la bande de Gaza et de déplacement forcé de sa population. De telles actions constitueraient de nouvelles violations caractérisées du droit international d'une extrême gravité, contraires aux principes fondamentaux sur lesquels se base cette organisation et en contradiction avec l'avis consultatif de la Cour internationale de justice du 19 juillet 2024. Elle représenterait, par ailleurs, une menace pour la sécurité régionale et mènerait à une impasse absolue. L'extension et l'intensification des opérations militaires israéliennes dans les zones les plus densément peuplées de Gaza auraient des conséquences humanitaires dramatiques. À Gazaville, mais également dans le reste de Gaza, les civils survivent déjà dans des conditions effroyables. Les images d'enfants mourant de faim ou de civils pris pour cible alors qu'ils cherchaient de la nourriture sont insoutenables. Il est essentiel qu'Israël se conforme à ses obligations en vertu du droit international humanitaire. Les annonces et demi-mesures ne suffisent pas. Les populations et infrastructures civiles doivent être protégées. Israël doit, de toute urgence, ouvrir tous les points de passage pour permettre un acheminement immédiat, massif, sûr et sans aucune entrave de l'aide humanitaire sur tout le territoire. Israël est tenu de permettre aux Nations Unies et à tous les acteurs humanitaires, dont les organisations non gouvernementales internationales, d'opérer librement et en toute sécurité. La mise en œuvre de la décision du gouvernement israélien ne contribuera en rien à la sécurité d'Israël et de ses ressortissants, en particulier celle des otages encore détenus par le Hamas à Gaza. La France appelle à nouveau vigoureusement le Hamas à leur libération immédiate, inconditionnelle, et à se saisir des propositions de cessez-le-feu plutôt que de prolonger, par son attitude d'obstruction, le calvaire de la population de Gaza. La France appelle au désarmement du Hamas et à sa reddition. Monsieur le Président, l'avenir de la bande de Gaza doit s'inscrire dans le cadre d'un futur État palestinien dirigé par l'autorité palestinienne. La France continuera à se mobiliser pour la mise en œuvre de la solution à deux États, la seule qui puisse garantir une paix et une sécurité durable pour les Israéliens et les Palestiniens, comme elle l'a fait lors de la conférence de New York, coprésidée avec l'Arabie saoudite. Nous appelons tous les États à s'inscrire dans cette dynamique collective en endossant la déclaration de New York, qui propose des mesures concrètes pour préserver la solution des deux États et œuvrer à la stabilisation de la bande de Gaza. Elle propose également le déploiement d'une mission internationale temporaire de stabilisation afin d'assurer la sécurité des Israéliens et des Palestiniens. Monsieur le Président, après 22 mois de souffrance, le calvaire enduré par la population de Gaza et par les otages doit cesser immédiatement. C'est pourquoi nous appelons le gouvernement d'Israël à revenir sur sa décision de prendre le contrôle militaire de la bande de Gaza. La France réitère son appel à un cessez-le-feu immédiat et permanent, à la libération des otages et à l'acheminement massif et sans entrave de l'aide humanitaire. Je vous remercie.
Agradezco a la delegación de Francia su declaración. Doy la palabra a la delegación de Grecia.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for convening this urgent meeting upon the request of the European members of this Council. I also wish to thank Assistant Secretary General Mr. Miroslav Jenca and OCHA Director Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham for their briefings. Only days ago, the international community gathered in New York with a clear yet urgent message. The war in Gaza must end, the two-state solution must be realized, Palestinians, Israelis, and all peoples of the region deserve a fair chance at peace. Yet, recent developments seem to have pushed this proposal further out of reach. We condemn Israel's decision to further expand its military operations in Gaza, and we urge Israel to reconsider it. Such actions would endanger the lives of all civilians in Gaza, deepen the humanitarian suffering, and exacerbate the anguish over the fate of the remaining hostages. They would also worsen the already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza and risk further loss of life and large-scale displacement of Palestinians. We strongly oppose any attempts to forcibly displace the Palestinian population and reiterate that any potential annexation of Gaza or any other part of the occupied Palestinian territories would contravene international law and numerous Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 2334, would jeopardize regional stability and security and would undermine the prospect of a two-state solution. Mr. President, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is severe and worsening. Hospitals are overstretched, starvation and malnutrition, especially among children, are worsening, access to clean water remains limited, and civilians risk their lives daily in search of food. We cannot turn a blind eye to this tragedy, nor remain silent while hostages continue to suffer at the hands of Hamas. We call once again for the immediate, unimpeded, and large-scale delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza. The blockade must be lifted, civilians and humanitarian workers must be protected in accordance with international humanitarian law, and the work of the aid agencies should be facilitated. Greece has taken concrete steps to alleviate suffering in Gaza. Just yesterday, in close cooperation with the European Union and other partners of the region, we conducted an airdrop of food supplies over Gaza. We also stressed the need to fully implement the humanitarian steps agreed upon between Israel and the European Union to improve the situation in Gaza. The expertise of the United Nations systems, particularly UNRWA, is pivotal. In addition, OCHA, as we have just heard again today, has repeatedly expressed its readiness to initiate a UN-coordinated humanitarian plan in the event of a ceasefire or pause in hostilities. We reaffirm our unwavering support for the agency in this regard. Mr. President, Greece's position remains principled and consistent. We have repeatedly condemned the atrocities of October 7. Hamas rule in Gaza must end. All hostages must be released immediately and unconditionally. At the same time, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza must be addressed without delay, and we remain steadfast in our support for the international call to implement the two-state solution. Mr. President, violence in all its forms is never the answer. Dialogue and diplomacy are the only viable path to lasting peace. We therefore call on both parties to agree to an immediate and permanent ceasefire to secure the release of all hostages and to advance efforts towards a two-state solution in line with relevant Security Council resolutions while guaranteeing Israel's right to exist in peace and security. I thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación de Grecia su declaración. Doy la palabra a la delegación de Eslovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for convening the urgent meeting at the request of the members of the Council, including my own country, Slovenia. We thank Assistant Secretary General Jenča, as well as Director Rajasingham, for their briefings. Mr. President, each time we come to this chamber to discuss the situation in Gaza, we come thinking that we cannot possibly reach new depth. And yet, we convene again today, following the reprehensible announcement by the Israel cabinet that it intends to expand its military campaign and take control of the Strip. A plan of horror and destruction. A new law which Slovenia utterly rejects. A new law which will end in mass civilian casualties and suffering. A new law which will make Israelis less safe in the short and long term. A new law, in spite of continuous appeals from the international community and from the numerous voices from Israel to end the war. Colleagues, Israel's decision directly contradicts the July 2024 advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, which declared that Israel must end its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory. It shows contempt towards the two-state solution, which was resoundingly reinforced by almost the entire international community at a conference held just 2 weeks ago, and which remains the official position of this Council, codified through its resolutions. Slovenia expresses its firm condemnation of this plan, and we call for its immediate reversal. Mr. President, Gaza's death toll is simply staggering. Israel has pursued a deliberate policy of starvation, of manufacturing a famine to pursue political and military gains, in a clear and blatant violation of international humanitarian law. The aerial photos which have emerged of Gaza in recent days show nothing but total destruction, a piece of land reduced to dust. And now we are faced with the prospect of further military escalation, of more violence, of an operation which will undoubtedly wreak havoc on civilians in Gaza and the hostages alike. Obvious questions arise. What will happen to those surviving Palestinians once Israel launches its takeover, particularly the 1 million people living in Gaza City, whose lives already hang in the balance, exhausted by attacks and denied aid? We will not be able to claim that we didn't know. We know that civilians are destined to suffer further mass casualties. We know that they will be displaced once more, chased from corner to tiny camps or even beyond. What will become of the hostages? Just 4 days ago, we heard the heartbreaking testimony of Eli David, brother of Eviatar David, who is still held hostage by Hamas in Gaza. He told us in clear terms that we cannot wait any longer. Who, if not this Council, can stop the killing? Every minute counts for Eviatar. Every minute counts for countless civilians caught in the fire in Gaza. We cannot simply accept a forever war and the continued destruction and traumatization of generations of Palestinians and Israelis. Ambassador Mansour on Tuesday used the words, "We chose peace." The Palestinian Authority has made commitments to comprehensive reforms necessary to govern Gaza and the West Bank. Does the Israeli leadership have the moral clarity to abandon military adventurism and choose peace? Does Hamas have the courage to choose peace, disarm, and to release the hostages immediately and without condition in full dignity? Colleagues, all civilians in Gaza, Israelis and Palestinians, are hostages. Our responsibility to move to protect them against upcoming military onslaught weighs heavy on our shoulders, including as an elected member of this Council. The impunity felt by the occupying power needs to be stopped. We listen and we hear a global cry for the war to stop, for hostages to be freed, for aid to flow in. We need to take action. That's why this Council was created, and that's why the Charter provided the Council with many tools to maintain peace and security. We stand ready to do whatever it takes to stop the killing and suffering. Thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación de Eslovenia su declaración. Doy ahora la palabra a la delegación de Argelia.
Mr. President, at the outset, I thank you for the prompt scheduling of this meeting, a meeting requested by almost all members of this Council, a meeting born of urgency. We extend our appreciation to ASG Yanka and to Mr. Rajasingham for their sobering briefings on the catastrophic reality in Gaza. Yes, Gaza is facing hell. It is in the hands of an occupying power that threatens the international peace and security. Algeria condemns in the strongest terms the decision of the Israeli cabinet to displace the entire population of Gaza City and northern Gaza, and to impose full military control of the Gaza Strip, as if Gaza was not already under occupation, as if Gaza was not already under inhuman siege. These are war crimes, and those who draw their maps in blood must not walk in the shadow of impunity. Justice must call them by name. There must be accountability. Mr. President, after 22 months of forced displacement, 22 months of starvation, 22 months of ethnic cleansing, such an operation would not merely ruin Gaza. It will just annihilate what remains of it. As if killing more than 62,000 people were not enough. As if killing more than 18,000 children for God's sake, were not enough. As if killing more than 12,000 women were not enough. As if starving to death more than 200 human beings were not enough. The list is too long, too heavy, too dark for this page to hold, and yet, persisting in their genocidal tactics, the Israeli occupying power plan more. Can you imagine what will be left if they execute their plan? Their objective is clear, crystal clear, to push an entire people outside their homeland. Palestinians shall have no state, no flag, no future in their land. No Palestinian shall stay from the river to the sea. Yet, they forget that the land remembers its sons. They forget that olive trees do not surrender to the axe. They grow back from the root. Despite the brutality of the oppression, Palestinians will not abandon their homeland. Palestinians will not let go their rights. We believe in their resilience, as we believe that Gaza, although wounded and bleeding, will one day rise again. Mr. President, let us be clear. The Israeli authorities care nothing for international law. They care nothing for this council. They care nothing for humanity itself. They act with brutality, cruelty, and barbarity, stripping Palestinians of their very essence as human beings, reducing them to something less in their eyes, to human animals. Yes, for them, Palestinians are just human animals. And so, they orchestrate the killing of Palestinians by every instrument. Starvation, thirst, weapons, and humiliation. Humiliation. Mr. President, faced with this genocide, every voice has risen. The International Court of Justice investigates the plausible crime of genocide by the Israeli occupying power. The International Criminal Court pursues those who sign their names in the records of war crimes. The General Assembly condemns repeatedly the occupation and demands its end. The United Nations Human Rights Council counts the wounds and denounces its violation. And yet, in this chamber, the one entrusted with peace and security by the United Nations Charter, sits. The Council sits silent. The Council says nothing. And silence is not neutral. Silence kills. Mr. President, the Security Council must rise to defend the child clutching the last crumb of bread. Rise to shield the mother searching for her sons under rubble. Rise to help the father wounded while seeking help to feed his kids. Rise to break the silence, to break the cycle of impunity. This Council must act decisively, resolutely, by resorting to its utmost tools to act under Chapter 7 of the Charter. The hour has come to impose sanctions on the hand that steals the land, on the flag that flaps over ruin. The hour has come to impose sanction on the enemy of humanity. I thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación de Argelia por su declaración. Doy la palabra a la delegación de Somalia.
Mr. President, I thank you for the swift convening of this emergency meeting today. I also express gratitude to Assistant Secretary General Yanka and Mr. Ramesh, head and representative of OCHA in Geneva, for their sobering briefing and tireless commitment. In the last 48 hours, Israel's announcement of its intention to impose military control over the entire Gaza Strip is not an abstraction. It's a chilling blueprint for the next chapter of its devastation to come. For the 2 million people still trapped in Gaza, this means the escalation of what has already become hell on earth, literally and figuratively, leading to the world's worst man-made famine. It's a death sentence for civilians where over 60,000 Palestinians have been killed since the escalation began, the majority of them women and children. More than 150,000 have been injured, and 90% of Gaza's population are now internally displaced, many living in makeshift shelters without clean water or food. The expanded military assault will make survival impossible for the civilian population. The International Court of Justice, in its recent advisory opinion, reaffirmed the legal obligation of Israel regarding the occupied Palestinian territory. The court was unequivocal. The occupation, the blockade, the denial of humanitarian access, and actions resulting in collective punishment violate international law. The continued targeting of essential services and the forcible displacement of the Palestinian people from their land in Gaza or the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, directly contradicts the principles this Council exists to uphold. We also stress the necessity of preserving the legal and historical status quo at the Islamic and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem, recognizing the essential role of the Hashemite custodianship in this regard. We are gravely concerned about the recent incidents at Al-Aqsa Mosque and reiterate that any provocation or violation undermines peace and stability and must be unequivocally condemned. Mr. President, we have heard enough talk of security as a pretext for collective punishment. True security cannot be built upon the ruins of justice. There can be no peace while occupation persists, and no real security unless the rights of Palestinians, including the right to self-determination, are recognized and protected. What is needed now is not another brief pause, but an immediate and a permanent ceasefire. Not another limited corridor, but full and unfettered humanitarian access so that food, water, medicine provided by agencies like UNRWA and OCHA can flow freely, not as a charity, but as a matter of right. Not another partial exchange, but the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages and detainees so that no one endures inhumane conditions under illegal captivity away from their families and loved ones. Not more negotiations to nowhere, but a genuine commitment to end the occupation and realize the two-state solution this Council and the world have long endorsed. We must not allow the language of military necessity to drown out the cries of the hungry and the displaced. The forced starvation of a population is not an accident of war. It's a crime under international law. The bombardment of neighborhoods and the expulsion of families are not regrettable side effects. They are violations that demand accountability. Mr. President, to conclude, this is not just a test for Israel and Palestine. It's a test for all humanity. Will we stand by, citing complexity and precedent? Or will we act with the urgency and moral clarity that this moment demands? In these darkest moments, it's worth remembering what brought the United Nations into existence in the first place. Our charter opens with a solemn pledge, and I quote, "to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war," end of quote. A promise born from the ashes of World War II, when the world vowed never again. Yet, 8 decades later, we are confronted once more with the images and the realities of children buried beneath rubble, starvation used as a weapon, families uprooted, and entire communities erased. If we cannot act now to uphold this promise in Gaza, we must ask ourselves, what then is the purpose of this council? What, in truth, remains of our solemn oath to future generations? Let the response not be graveyard silence. And silence in moments like these is not neutrality. For all the victims, it is a verdict. I thank you, Mr. President.
Agradezco a la delegación de Somalia su declaración. Doy la palabra a la delegación de la República de Corea.
Thank you, Mr. President, for convening this meeting in a timely manner. I would also like to thank ASG and Mr. Rajasingham for their concise and powerful briefings. The Republic of Korea is gravely concerned by the Israeli Security Cabinet's recent approval to expand the war in Gaza and occupy Gaza City, as this plan entails significant and multifaceted risks. We urge Israel to retract this plan. In this context, I would like to address each risk in turn. First, the plan, if implemented, will devastate an already catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Daily images of starving Palestinian children and aerial scenes of Gaza's near total destruction demands our attentions to focus on alleviating the dire humanitarian needs. However, the proposed military escalation will only deepen the extended suffering of an exhausted, sick, and hungry population. Not deliver the humanitarian relief they so clearly need, and that the international community is urgently calling for. The proposed plan's primary target, Gaza City, is one of the few remaining areas where a large civilian population has sought tenuous refuge. And a renewed full-scale operation against it will inevitably cause another round of forced displacement and killings. With much of Gaza already declared a buffer zone or under evacuation orders, and its borders largely sealed, displaced civilians lack shelter or safe zones, raising fears of mass expulsion or so-called voluntary migration, which is not in itself voluntary. Second, this plan entails a grave risk to the lives of the hostages. This council, including my country, has spoken with one voice in calling for their immediate and unconditional release. Yet, the announced plan, if implemented, will expose them to intensified hostilities and undermine diplomatic efforts toward their freedom. While Israel claims that it will push for the release of the hostages through decisive military victory, such an outcome could make it more difficult to bring the hostages home, a concern voiced by their families. Hamas' explicit warning that any further military expansion could risk the hostage, which the Republic of Korea resolutely condemns, adds further weight to this concern. Meanwhile, we remind Hamas that the release of all hostages is imperative to prevent any further deterioration to the situation. Hamas' continued holding of hostages, despite the ongoing despair of innocent civilians in Gaza, is unjustifiable. Under any excuse, nothing but a contemptible act. Third, Israel should not undermine the prospect of a two-state solution and regional stability. The Republic of Korea has continuously reiterated our full support for the two-state solution, along with the vast majority of the international community, in line with relevant UNSC resolution, including Resolution 2334, as the only viable path forward to bring peace, security, prosperity, and dignity to all people in the region. Yet Israel's plan encompasses so many elements incoherent to the resolution, which can result in seizing full control of Gaza while rejecting the Palestinian Authority. These actions are exactly the opposite of what the resolution aimed for: peaceful and sustainable coexistence of Israel and Palestinians. Israel must therefore not only retract the plan, but also cease any annexation efforts, including its West Bank settlement activities, which are clearly illegal under international law. In closing, Mr. President, let me make a final remark. As a representative from a long divided, once war-torn nation, the Republic of Korea understands, perhaps more than most, the tragic consequences of protracted conflict, as well as the urgency of multilateral assistance and humanitarian aid. Our history powerfully teaches us that military force alone cannot guarantee permanent peace and security. It can only defer the recurrence of conflict. This is why, despite the persistence of challenging circumstances, we remain committed to resolving differences through dialogue and cooperation rather than through force. We therefore call once again on all relevant parties to sincerely engage with ongoing mediation efforts of the international community aimed at securing ceasefire, releasing the hostages, and mobilizing and ensuring unhindered and dignified aid to Gaza at scale. Only through a genuine dialogue, sustained commitment, and mutual compromise can we hope to construct the robust foundation for a just and durable peace for all. I thank you, Mr. President.
Agradezco a la República de Corea su declaración. Doy la palabra a Sierra Leona.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for convening this emergency meeting at the request and with support of almost all of the members of the Security Council. I also thank Assistant Secretary General Yencha and Mr. Rajasinghan for their valuable briefings. Sierra Leone expresses its full solidarity with the leadership and personnel of the United Nations and all humanitarian partners who, despite immense challenges, continue to serve humanity with courage and dedication. Mr. President, colleagues, the decision by the Israeli Security Cabinet to take control of Gaza City through an expanded military operation has shocked and alarmed the international community and capitals across the world. As underscored in the Secretary General's statement on the issue, this represents an extremely dangerous escalation that will deepen the already catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Gaza, cause further mass displacement, and increase civilian casualties in a territory already devastated by months of bombardment. If implemented, such reoccupation or annexation would constitute a grave breach of international law, including international humanitarian law. It reflects collective punishment of the Palestinian population through indiscriminate and systemic attacks on civilians and obstruction of urgently needed humanitarian assistance, both prohibited under the Geneva Conventions. This course of action is in direct contravention of the International Court of Justice's 2024 advisory opinion on the legal consequences of Israel's policies and practices in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and is contrary to binding Security Council resolutions, including 242 of 1967 and 2334 of 2016. These instruments reaffirm the inadmissibility of acquiring territory by force, the illegality of settlement activity, and the imperative of ending the occupation that began in 1967. As the Secretary General has further warned, there will be no sustainable solution to this situation, to this conflict, without an end to this unlawful occupation and achievement of a viable two-state solution. Gaza is and must remain an integral part of a Palestinian state. End of quote. The scale of the humanitarian crisis is unprecedented. Over 61,000 civilians killed, 152,000 wounded, and the entire population on the brink of famine, according to the latest IPC alert. Humanitarian workers themselves are going without daily meals as access is blocked. Inaction by this Council and member states with influence will only lead to further destruction, loss of life, and the erosion of human dignity. Mr. President, the plight of the remaining hostages is a matter of serious concern, and Sierra Leone reiterates its call for their immediate and unconditional release. However, the situation cannot be used to justify violations of international law. Measures of collective punishment or the unlawful annexation of territory. International law requires that civilians be protected at all times, without exception. Reoccupation and annexation will not address Israel's legitimate security concerns. On the contrary, such measures are likely to deepen hostility, entrench instability, and delay the normalization of relations with its neighbors. Genuine normalization endorsed by the Arab Peace Initiative and consistent with the two-state solution offers Israel the prospect of lasting peace, security, and regional acceptance, but only if it is accompanied by an end to occupation and the realization of Palestinian statehood. This conflict demands both urgent action to halt the violence and a long-term commitment to a political horizon grounded in the two-state solution. Any action that ignores these objectives risks perpetuating instability in occupied Palestinian territory and the wider region. Accordingly, Sierra Leone reiterates the following. First, the Council must remain united in demanding an immediate and lasting ceasefire and in using all diplomatic and political tools to ensure compliance with international law and the relevant UN resolutions. We also reiterate the need and legal obligation for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages held by Hamas and other armed groups since 7 October 2023, all Palestinians as well as all Palestinians detainees. We urge Hamas and the other armed groups to allow access to the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, to the hostages to assess and support their well-being. Second, in line with the ICJ's provisional measures of 24 May 2024, Israel must, in full cooperation with the United Nations, ensure the unhindered provision at scale of basic services and humanitarian aid throughout Gaza, in full respect of international humanitarian law. Third, recalling the ICJ's advisory opinion of 19 July 2024, Israel's continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territory is unlawful and must end as rapidly as possible. All policies and actions that harm the civilian population or undermine the viability of the two-state solution must cease immediately. Fourth, accountability is essential. The Council must act to end the cycle of impunity that has allowed violations to persist for decades. All grave breaches of international law, including annexation, must be met with consequences. Mr. President, for decades, the United Nations has provided a clear framework for peace. Two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security within internationally recognized borders, with Jerusalem as their shared capital. These are not aspirational ideals. They are obligations arising from the resolutions of this Council and the principles of the UN Charter. The decision to reoccupy Gaza moves in the opposite direction, from law towards chaos, from diplomacy towards escalation. It risks destroying what remains of the credibility of the political process and further diminishing prospects of a negotiated settlement. The Council must reject any action that seeks to alter the status of Gaza by force and must reaffirm unequivocally that Gaza is an inseparable part of the Palestinian state. We must work collectively to uphold international law, to end the occupation, and to realize the vision of two states living in peace, security, and mutual recognition. The time for principled and decisive action is now. I thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación de Sierra Leona por su declaración. Doy la palabra a la delegación de Estados Unidos.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Assistant Secretary General Yencha and Director Rajasingham, for your briefings. Mr. President, the United States government believes that today's meeting is emblematic of the counterproductive role that far too many governments on this Council and throughout the UN system have played on this issue. Meanwhile, the United States has been working tirelessly to free the hostages, end this war, and give civilians in Gaza a future free of Hamas. To do so, we need to place responsibility where it lies, with Hamas, and hold it and other Gaza terrorist organizations fully accountable. Today's meeting, like so many other recent actions, undermines those efforts. Israel has accepted 3 ceasefire proposals. Hamas consistently rejected them. It is not negotiating in good faith. We know this because we are in the room. The simple truth is that this war could end today if Hamas let the hostages and all of Gaza go free. Remarkably, instead of pressuring Hamas, members